Let me state this clearly, colleagues. I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with any campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign. I was your colleague in this body for 20 years, at least some of you, and and the suggestion that I participated in any collusion, that I was aware of any collusion with the Russian government to hurt this country, which I have served with honor for 35 years, or to undermine the integrity of our democratic process, is an appalling and detestable lie.
Jeff Sessions in testimony today before the Senate Intelligence Committee. CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reid and CBS News contributor and Washington Post political reporter Ed O'Keefe join us now. Paula, what stands out to you?
Well, he came out swinging at the outset. His opening statement, you just showed a part of it. He was explicit. He said, I had no collusion with the Russians. I had no additional meetings with anyone on behalf of the Russian government. He said, I am here to be transparent and give you answers about all the questions that you have. It was a very strong start for the Attorney General. Unfortunately, most of his transparency was sort of on himself, just being there, questions about meetings he had, and he didn't really shed a lot of light on the president's thinking, specifically when it came to what led up to the firing of the former FBI director.
Ed, there wasn't a whole lot of transparency on his conversations with the president.
That's right, and that continues to be very frustrating for members of both parties. I think even Chairman Burr there at the end saying, you know, I understand where you're at right now, but if you don't cough up all that other information we're asking for, you're going to be in trouble with me, at least. And certainly I think Republicans did what they could to at least place Sessions in certain rooms and in certain situations, if not get him to talk about the content of the conversations he had either with the president or with Director Comey. To the question of was he evading senators selectively and whatnot, certainly it does seem, and Democrats are pointing this out, that they seem to clam up, administration officials do, when it comes to sensitive questions regarding this and their interactions specifically with the president. It's not totally inappropriate, however, for the Attorney General, and in some cases some of those other officials who testified last week and earned the ire of senators, to sort of preemptively suggest that the president might want to invoke executive privilege over some of those issues. The issue is they haven't actually asked the president, or he's had no reason to weigh in on the matter because he didn't know what the questions were. So they can sort of say, look, for now, I can't get into this. It could be at a later date that the president either talks about it publicly himself or just says, don't worry about it, ask him whatever you want, that then in some kind of follow-up, either written or oral testimony, perhaps the Attorney General could come back and discuss this. And as Paula probably knows better than I, since she covers DOJ, there is indeed department policy that asks officials not to publicly discuss various matters for fear of a chilling effect, as the Attorney General suggested, and also because they just don't discuss certain investigative and other internal matters publicly for fear that it suppresses or chills conversations that should be somewhat frank and presumed private. So realize that there's an audience for today that's frustrated by that, be they a partisan crowd or just confused that a public official wouldn't engage Congress. But in fact, there is some precedent for this, as frustrating as it may be, especially for Democrats who are on the committee.
It's a very good point, Ed. And so, Paul, let me ask you about that. Whether it's memos, whatever else, the longstanding DOJ policy that was cited multiple times by the Attorney General, what is he talking about?
That's right. There is a long-standing practice. It's not a law. It's simply a rule, and he could ignore it if he wanted to, or you don't discuss things that you've discussed with the executive branch. He noted in his testimony, he says the spirit of that rule is to encourage debate. People will speak freely, argue both sides of an issue. But here we've seen over the past week top national intelligence officials really hugging very tightly to a very broad interpretation of that rule and refusing to discuss anything that they have shared with the president. Now, they could have, he had one out, he could have said, look, the president has personally discussed some of the conversations he had with me and my deputy in terms of the firing of former FBI Director Comey. Therefore, perhaps he has waived part of the privilege. Perhaps I can give you a few more details on that. But he didn't. He chose to really enforce this rule very broadly, and at every chance he said, look, I'm not going to discuss what I discussed with the president. And, it seemed very frustrating to the people who were questioning him on the Hill.
But so is it codified anywhere, Paula, or is this just cited in various memoranda over the years and then has evolved through different conversations?
It is codified in certain memos, internal memos. The Justice Department, in the absence of a law or something in a statute, they'll write memos on how they want you to handle certain issues, from enforcement priorities to dealing with conversations with the executive branch to if you have a complaint about something the White House has done, who do you bring it to? These are all codified in memorandums, and there are memos within the Justice Department that do lay this out. But again, it's a rule. He's the Attorney General. He can interpret it a different way, but he chose to stick to this precedent. It's a rule. I would call it maybe even a custom.
And to your point from before, Ed, talking about future potential sessions with Sessions or someone else, Chairman Burr did mention that Mike Rogers met with them last night for 2 hours behind closed doors, correct?
Yeah. Yep. That's right. There's usually a Monday night session of at least a few members of the committee. They either get caught up on intelligence matters that developed over the weekend, or they can use it for classified briefings, as the chairman suggested there. That's exactly what happened.
All right. Paula, what's next when it comes to Jeff Sessions, from your understanding?
I think there's going to be a lot of questions about that answer he gave about not being briefed on Russian state-sponsored hacking into our election. That was shocking, Jeff. I even followed up with his staffers after he said he's never been briefed, either in a classified setting or otherwise, on the extent of Russia's efforts to interfere in the election. That is arguably separate and distinct from any efforts of a campaign to collude with the Russians. At least 17 intelligence agencies and outlets have said that they agree the Russians interfered. And Jeff, after maybe opioids, this is one of the greatest law enforcement and national security threats that we face. So it is stunning that the nation's top law enforcement official has not been briefed on this effort. And I think that is going to be an area where a lot of people are going to follow up on that and wonder, well, if the Attorney General isn't pursuing how to prevent the next state-sponsored hacking attempt, who is?
How much of that, Paula, could they say is linked to the recusal?
That's what they tried to do. They pointed me to his statement, but his statement is about the extent of his recusal. His recusal specifically says it is related to any investigations that have to do with campaigns for president. It seems that perhaps he is interpreting that to include the Russian efforts to spread fake news, to hack into different people's emails. But that is an exceptionally broad interpretation of that recusal. And it's news to me that he believes that is included. Because, again, he is the nation's top law enforcement official. He is tasked with making sure that we are preventing state-sponsored attacks. So if you don't understand fully the most recent one in memory, it's a fair question. Well, who is studying this and trying to prevent this from happening again?
Paula Reid and Ed O'Keefe, thank you both for helping us digest this testimony. Go ahead, Ed.
No, I was just going to say, I think Paula's right, and there will be questions up here following up on that specific point. Is his recusal so broad that he's not involved in what is arguably a very important national security matter? The other thing I'd point out, there are other committees who want to hear from him. The Appropriations Committee that did not get a crack at him this morning, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. The leaders of that panel were meeting today. Chuck Grassley of Iowa, Dianne Feinstein of California. They are now working out what exactly they may pursue in this whole Trump-Russia Comey affair, whether they'll issue subpoenas and what more they need to learn about what the FBI was doing and not doing, perhaps, in regards to this whole mess. So Sessions is not out of the blue by any means, at least up here at the Capitol.
Well, listen, so that's one of the storylines here today, right, is the broad interpretations, both of the recusal matter and of the DOJ policy about not having these discussions.
At least up here, I would think so. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Paula Reid, Ed O'Keefe, once again, thank you both very much. We're going to take a quick break. CBSN is back.